Hello and welcome! My name is Jessica Gem, and in today's video I'm painting a pet portrait that I did for a Christmas present for a relative. To see the sketching process, check out Christmas Sketches Part 1. And this is a bit of a long one, so let's get going! Slight disclaimer before I get started, I've never really filmed traditional art in this way before, so it's a little janky and my setup isn't the best. Also, while I do dabble occasionally into physical mediums, I am primarily a digital artist, so keep that in mind as we go along. Now, in my other video, I did do a sketch, but it was more for composition and ideation than actual accuracy. So my first step here is to properly sketch out on paper the proportions of the pets, how they look, patterns, etc. I wanted to make sure to get a pretty good understanding of their shapes before moving on to the canvas, because sometimes if you sketch directly on the canvas, some of the lines can still kind of stick around. I start off with Tilly, making sure to keep her nice and fluffy, giving her the proper puppy proportions for a little Maltsu Maltese Shih Tzu cross. I move on to Thea, who is a cat. I'm not really sure about the distinctions between breeds of cats, but she's fairly fluffy, slim, and very pretty. Finally, I start on Freya, who is a mixed breed of some sort. I'm not really sure what kinds, but she's a big happy friend and very chill. After getting some more references, I realized that my sketch didn't look very much like her, especially in the face. So I went back in and tried to capture her likeness a bit more accurately. I prepped the base color, which I decided on a pink gradient for, going from dark at the top to lighter at the bottom. I went over it a couple of times to get decent coverage, and then once it dried, I started my canvas sketch. It's fairly hard to see the pencil on it with the current colors and lighting setup, but basically it went as most sketches go. I did the large basic shapes first, having to completely change the placement of things a couple of times, and then got a little more into the details. I used a paintbrush storage thing underneath whenever I had to erase to keep the canvas from stretching as I continued on, doing my best to translate the paper sketch onto it. Again, Freya gave me the most trouble, so I had to fiddle with her quite a bit, both in this stage and in the future, as you will see. I finally finished fiddling with the sketch and moved on to the base coat of white. It gave me a more solid base to work on for the colors without having the pink show through too much, while still allowing me to see my sketch through it, so that all my other work didn't go to waste. I did my best to correctly cover all the shapes and edges in my base coat and then give it a second pass to make it a bit more opaque. Once I had that down, I started with Thea, using a light gray and working my way darker and darker for her patterns. She has some slight tan in places, so I add that without going too overboard. When building up layers, subtlety can be valuable. I move to darker tones, trying to add texture and keep the limbs from blending together. Once I have the more subtle color nuances, I line the face and start to add the details in the face, like the nose and eyes. I go ahead with her patterning, especially using the paintbrush to add shapes that follow the fur and show the more obvious direction and strands to it. I go back to the face to try again with the eyes and mouth, making them a bit more expressive as I'm not going for total realism. Using gray on the white areas really adds volume and keeps it from just looking like a blob, and with a few tiny tweaks, she's done. I start Tilly with the base of her patches to section out certain parts. This time working from the darker spots, since for her they're more of an undertone inside the fur colors. While I'm going, I make sure to add fluff to get better details each time I go into an area, taking the mix of colors and fur into consideration. I add her little toe pads and touch up a couple more areas, and she's added to the portrait. And last but certainly not least, Freya, our gentle giant. She's got a dusty tan-colored coat with some white patches, so I start with a fairly rich color with plans to dull it down later. As you can see, I erased her face again and lightened her all over before attempting it. I mess around a bit with her face shape and then work on a few other areas to try and accomplish something. I render the tail out with its black and white tip and start to define Freya's shapes, giving her muscle mass and contours. Since she's got short fur, I couldn't depend as much on fluff as I did for the other two. I keep lightening her and adding volume, finishing up her patterns and body. This takes a ton of push and pull, so I'll speed it up to get through. I also cut out a lot of footage here from when I was just not painting, looking at references. I was really having a hard time getting Freya right. And back to the face. I realized her head was going straight into her body, so I gave her a bit more neck, but that didn't work the greatest, so I abandoned it again to futz with other stuff. I went back to the head, adding details to see if that would help with the shape. I defined the ears, messed around with the snout, and then tried to add the eye, covered it up, and started again on the whole mouth area after changing the outer edge. This attempt was certainly better than the last, but still didn't feel quite right. I changed her full color to be a bit closer to stall and then tried again, continuing to adjust colors as I went along. I shaded the white areas, did a bit more messing with it, then fixed up a couple areas of the background around them, neatening up the edges while still trying to keep the gradient. I added her collar and did more stuff because I could not stop changing things, and then rendered the face even more, adding definition and teeth and shine. As I'm writing this script, I am watching it back and I keep thinking it's almost done, but apparently not. I kept adding details, this time moving on to the shines, whiskers, and final pops. I added a nondescript platform for Miss Thea to be sitting upon, with that same pink but darkened, going carefully around the edges of them and using a couple coats to solidify it. Since I was using a square composition but bought a rectangle canvas, I decided to add a border to emulate a Polaroid photo. I did the first coat of white, added a shadow under them, and then went over both again. I did more touch-ups to the background and added black corners like it's in a scrapbook. I added some cute little hearts, used a bleed-through method to get the letter shapes and sizes that I wanted, and finished writing them out. It's the girls! And I am truly, finally done. This took so long to paint, write, and edit, so thank you for sticking around. I hope you had a chill time. If you've enjoyed this video, please grant me a like, and if you'd like to see how the rest of my sketches turned out, subscribe to join me. That's all for now, so farewell and have a wonderful day.